straight white America in western Idaho in a farming community that was surrounded by open range cattle country. And then in my teen years, we moved to Portland, Oregon, which was a straight up culture shock for me. My community, both socially and religiously, didn't have any room for who I was or who I am. And so what I ended up finding was a lifeline, and it was a job on a working farm out in Clackamas, Oregon, back when that used to be rural. And I was a farmhand, pretty much. If I wasn't in school, I was at work. And I loved everything about my job. And twice a year, this company called All West Lex Sires would come through, and they would hold a class at our farm and lease some of our property. All West Lex Sires then, I don't pretend to know what they do now, but then what they did was they dealt in semen. So cattle semen, horse semen, sheep semen, and pig semen. And what their classes were about were teaching ranchers and farmers how to synchronize their herds and their flocks for artificial insemination, because not only was it more economical, it's actually safer for their animals. So synchronizing flocks, what that means is you use implants of hormones to stop ovulation in your female animals, and then you pull them all at the same time. So everybody's ovulating together. So you just kind of streamline the process. Artificial insemination is something else altogether. It's different for each species, sort of, but I'll talk about cattle because that's what I worked the most closely with. So with cattle, for artificial insemination, it depends on your dominant hand. For me, it's right. So you reach with your left hand through the rectum, and then you palpate their reproductive organs, and you find the cervix. And then their uteruses, they're called uterine horns because they have their uterus splits, and it goes like this and attaches to ovaries. So the uterine horns split off right from the cervix, and just beyond the cervix is where you want to take the pipette with your right hand, insert it through the vagina, past the cervix, and deposit the semen. So I was very good at this. And it was a skill set that I was absolutely certain was going to serve me well in life. I knew this. So when All West came through each year, I did my very best to shine. I worked extra hours. I came in early. I had coffee hot waiting for them. And what they did was they brought in these groups of men, these farmers, these ranchers, and they were all men in their midlife learning a new trade because they were keeping up with the times. So the arrangement that I had made essentially was when All West was there, I worked my ass off early, I worked my ass off late, and instead of doing maintenance chores in the mid-time, I could sit in class. In this particular year that I'm talking about, they had come during lambing season. So my responsibilities during lambing season were to walk the flocks and watch for ewes that were dropping or ready to drop, which means they were about to be or were in labor. And there's some things that you can see, which I'll save you all the details, but externally, like there's a swollen vulva, there's a change in their conformation. So you watch for those things and you bring those ewes in and you bring them into the barn. And so this particular morning, I did see a ewe and I thought, is she or isn't she? I really want to get to class. I'm bringing her in. So I brought her into the barn and I put her in a jug, and that's what we called stalls for ewes. And we had just a series of these jugs. And so I put her in a jug. I thought, I'll check on her later. I want to get to class. So I ran into class and I sat down in the front row, which is where I sat because I was demonstrating in every way possible that I was better than everybody else in this class. And because I had mastered this skill that these middle-aged men were trying to learn, and I was a teenage girl, like I was the shit. And they all needed to just learn from me. So I wanted to make sure I was visible, and I wanted to make sure they knew how good I was at everything. So I'm sitting in the front row. And mid-morning, Jeff, who was one of the other farm hands, comes in, and he comes in really quickly, and he whispers, not quietly at all, in my ear, the ewe in jug 8 is dead. And that was my ewe that I had brought in that morning. And I said to him, as I stood straight up, "No, she is not." And he looked at me in a very solemn way and he said, "Kahlie, I'm sure." And I busted out of the workroom where this class was happening, and I was running for the sheep barn. And as I was running for the sheep barn, I had all these thoughts going through my mind, like too many to remember, too many to even tell you guys. But the first and foremost was, I couldn't believe that I was sitting in class while this animal died of dystocia. And dystocia is just painful birth. If I was paying attention to her, I could have helped her. I could have called for help. I could have saved her. I could have saved her baby. But instead, I wanted to sit in class. And then my second thought was, maybe I can still save the baby. Maybe the lamb or lambs is still alive. I don't know how long ago she died. Couldn't have been that long ago. So I'm running even faster, and as I'm running, I feel my right leg. My knife is there. I'm on this. This is happening. And so I'm running into the barn. I bust into the sheep barn. I don't think, I don't look, I don't do anything. Jeff is just right on my heels. And I literally catapult myself into this jug. And just like Jeff said, there is a ewe. She's lateral. She's dead in this stall. And I dropped to my knees and I started to kind of examine her and look at her. And I realized she was newly passed. Her body was soft. She hadn't gone into rigor yet. She was warm. And I realized saving these lambs was a real possibility. And I looked up at Jeff and I pulled out my knife and I said to him, "Could you?" And Jeff said, "No fucking way." And I looked at the ewe and I thought, I'm so scared of cutting these babies, but she's dead. So I can make a cut really far away from the uterus and I could save these babies. And so I began to cut, and I made my cut midline, really, actually right at the rib cage. And I cut down, and then I started using my hands to move down, and I essentially eviscerated this animal. I pulled out her liver or spleen or stomach or intestines, but no full uterus with babies inside of it, which made no sense. At this point, I should have had a uterus spilling at my knees full of baby or babies, and it wasn't there. And in fact, what I did find was this small empty uterus. And as I was finding this small empty uterus, I hear from my left, "What in the Sam hell is going on in here?" And I look up and I see Frazier. And Frazier is the person who lives on the farm and runs the farm. And I said, I don't know. She was dropping. I brought her in. She died. I don't know. And he said, the ewe you brought in is now in jug 8 where there's more room. This is a different ewe. You know we don't use jugs to identify who the animal is, right? And in my excitement and in my being overwhelmed by the situation, I hadn't taken any time at all to identify the animal that I was dealing with. And what I actually had in front of me was one of our older retired ewes who had evidently gotten sick and died that morning, and I had eviscerated in her stall. Frazier looks at me with zero sympathy and says, "You're dealing with this," and walks out. And as I watch him walk out, I realize there's an audience behind him, because all of the men from the artificial insemination class have followed me and all of my dramatics into the sheep barn, and they begin applauding and making lamb sounds at me. And for the rest of the week while they were there, I had to endure applauses and baby lamb noises behind me everywhere that I went. It's just me against the world.